Ultimately, it was agreed that Solaris, Barnell, and Vanessa would go with Eve to the town of Hollythorn and put in the order to evacuate. From there, they would go into the woods to further investigate. Cassian would stay in the town of Goldfinch to help those who evacuated the town of Hollythorn and also rally any forces should they be needed as backup. The Tiefling was not happy about the idea of traveling with Solaris, but she kept it to herself for the time being, focusing on eating some of the large breakfast Vanessa had cooked for them with the help of the innkeeper. Solaris watched her constantly. Clearly, whatever Vanessa had said to him the night before had not been enough to change the Dark Elf's view that she was little more than an interloper herself, and should not be allowed to wander without someone to watch her every move. Though, if Solaris was honest, and given the slightest of smiles on Vanessa's face whenever she caught him watching the Tiefling, the Dark Elf knew that the High Elf woman was enjoying his struggle to find any kind of fault or flaw in the actions Eve was taking to prepare. He might not trust the Tiefling woman, but he knew the value of a well-trained and well-prepared company. Eve had clearly spent enough time traveling that she was no stranger to proper preparations. She'd sharpened her swords with practiced, confident ease after breakfast, and before they began traveling she'd made sure that the packs on Iris's back were secure, then taken the time to visit the local charms, spells, and tonic shop to purchase a few helpful brews and herbs that could be used in a battle or off the field to promote healing or deflect unwanted attacks from unfriendly foes. Vanessa was glad to see that Iris had no issue walking alongside their horses as they rode to Hollythorn, completely ignoring the horses in favor of sniffing the ground for threats while her ears moved around slowly, listening for any threat that might come while Eve used the time to inspect a smaller, more detailed map of the area. The behavior reminded both elves of a young human companion they had shared in past adventures, one who had sadly not returned home with them. Barnell was unusually quiet from his place guarding the rear of their small party, but Solaris could feel the bronze dragonborn watching him as they traveled, likely just to make sure he didn't say anything to insult Eve. How either of them could be so trusting he would never understand. The Tiefling had no place in their lives and had made clear her choice to leave the area as soon as she had the chance. She was not going to be swayed from that choice, no matter how many times Vanessa or Barnell tried to approach the topic. When they reached the town of Hollythorn later that morning, Solaris's personal thoughts of Eve were pushed aside in favor of other, more important matters. The town had been attacked. The inn, jail, several homes, and the officers' barracks were burned out, smoldering with a strange fire. The few flames that remained within those buildings were burning a vibrant blue color, but the embers and ashes of the fires that had gone out were tainted with green. There was a heavy smell of blood in the air, but what made Solaris fight to keep his magic at bay was the sight of a small body, crushed and ruined by the fire. "Is this the Blessed's work?" Barnell questioned, anger evident in his voice. "Yes," Eve nodded sadly, looking around the ruined town. "Looks like this was done 2 days ago," she added. "Why didn't we hear of this?" Solaris demanded. "Why didn't the word come of the attack?" "The Blessed are not stupid. They surround their target, and they strike to kill," Eve said, shaking her head. "Plus, there is no smoke from the fire, no smell beyond the town. People beyond this place wouldn't notice it unless they came through the town, and the Blessed do not allow anyone to run for help, not even the children." Barnell growled deep in his throat, a way to keep from completely blowing up with anger. Are all the blessed able to use this fire? Vanessa asked, trying to keep from going after the blessed without a plan. No. From what I've seen, the only ones who use this power are mages and clerics. They use some kind of tome to ignite the fire, Eve explained. A tome? Barnell repeated. Like spellbooks? It didn't look like any book to me. More like a slab of black stone. Like those testimony stones some people keep in temples and shrines, the Tiefling offered, to give a visual reference of what she was talking about. A tome of that design tends to be old. Older than any modern-day translation could properly decipher. Do you know what language they speak to use this fire? The High Elf pressed. From what I remember hearing of it, I think it's some kind of mix between infernal, elfish, and celestial. But it's not fluid like normal spells and magic. It sounds feral almost, as if they were fighting to get the words out, the Tiefling explained, shaking her head a little. Sorry if that's not much help. I'm not good at naming magics or placing their source, but I'm pretty sure natural magic is fluid and flows from its caster. It shouldn't be forced out. You're partly right. Some spells and charms are fluid, but some of the more powerful spells need a more forceful tone to direct the magic if the caster is young or if they aren't versed in the style of magic they're trying to use, Vanessa explained with a small smile. You're a magic user? Eve guessed. The High Elf woman did not look the type to use magic, but then again, there were some elven folk who had magic in their blood that never bloomed. I dabble, Vanessa nodded. My mother was a cleric, my father a monk. My brothers got the stronger magical blood. I got the brains and a little magic. Lucky for you, Eve smiled, and Vanessa gave her a look that told of many victories over said brothers through careful planning and brains, rather than outright brawn and magical ability. Does your family have magic blood in it? Barnell asked. You seem educated in it. It's diluted by about 16 generations, according to my brother Ashkin, Eve nodded. My pa had some old magic from Levistith in his line, and my ma was apparently the heir of some long-lost line of Asmodeus. But we've never had much skill in magic, aside from being able to see some strands of it when in a fight and tell where it's coming from. Sounds like you're sensitive to magic, the Dragonborn said. A useful ability, some say. I guess. It's not something I really focus on when I'm crossing my blades with someone, Eve shrugged. You fight dual hand? Vanessa asked, looking at the short sword across Eve's lower back, the long sword that was wrapped in cloth, and then at the knife on the Tiefling's left thigh. You carry 3 blades. Eve just smiled. When we find the blessed, you'll see for yourself how I fight. Iris growled suddenly, and Eve's hand went to the knife while Solaris looked deep into the woods, trying to see what had gotten the dire wolf's attention as the Tiefling slid from the wolf's back, one hand still on her knife. Something big moved in the trees, and Barnell had just enough time to yell, "Bear!" before the beast charged them. Claws and teeth, already sick with blood, sank into the throat of Solaris's horse, the dark elf being thrown from the steed by the bear's attack. Eve snapped a command at Iris while ripping the packs from the wolf's body, allowing Iris to move free and unhindered by added weight. Solaris watched in some awe as the dire wolf knocked the bear away from his steed's body. The unfortunate beast, having not survived the attack, fell to the ground. Vanessa was at his side in a moment, swift hands carefully tending to the claw mark on his leg, as Barnell stood before them as added defense, though it soon became clear it was not needed. Eve gave another command, and Iris grabbed the bear in her maw and shook the smaller beast about like a chew toy for a brief moment before dropping it. The bear did not move again. "Are you all right?" Eve asked, looking at Solaris. "I'm fine," he assured stiffly. "You speak Wolven tongue?" Eve looked at him with some surprise, then smiled and shook her head. "My brother Ashken is a beast tamer. He taught me attack commands in Wolven tongue so I could keep Iris with me as a companion after she was rejected as a hunting aid for being the runt of her litter," she explained, as Iris came over and nudged Solaris's injured leg as if checking the injury. Eve called her away, and Vanessa asked, "How old is she?" "About 3 years. She's only going to get a little bigger than this before she stops growing," the Tiefling admitted, with a small smile as Iris sat down, waiting for them to move on. Eve moved to the carcass of the bear, and then seemed to inspect something about it before nodding. "The blessed are still in the area." "How do you know?" Solaris asked as he moved to see what she had found. Eve used her knife to cut something from the bear's thick furred leg and held it out to him, an iron tag that had been embedded in the skin of the bear's leg, decorated with the mark of the blessed. They made their way slowly into the woods after hiding the 2 remaining horses and their packs. The unnatural silence of the trees made every slight movement of their clothes seem louder than it should have been, though Solaris noticed there was no sound as Eve moved, the only giveaway that she was even there being that he could see her in front of him, moving in a manner that somehow masked her steps, if not for the fact he could see her, Barnell, and Vanessa in front of him, Iris at her side as they slowly made their way through the unsettling silence of the woods. He would never have guessed that the Tiefling was even there amongst the shadows of the trees. Vanessa stopped suddenly, her hand catching Barnell's wrist and stilling him, pointing to her ears when the Dragonborn gave her a questioning look. Iris's ears twitched, and she turned towards the sound, slowly padding forwards just a few steps and sniffed the ground. Then she lay down. Eve moved to stand with her, silently kneeling and putting a hand to her companion's fur before nodding to them, a signal for them to come closer to show them what Iris had found. Drag marks and disjointed tracks from undead husks littered the soil, and amongst them a clear set of purposeful and directional prints. Just one living. The rest of these tracks are from undead, Barnell concluded, trying to keep his voice as quiet as possible. "Why come into the woods?" Vanessa asked. "There's nothing in here that could be used as a base of operations or a stronghold." "Maybe they are looking for something else," Eve offered. "Are there any stories about these woods?" "None," Solaris said. "These woods have never had anything of interest in them, nor the area around them. The only place near here with any history is the City of Birds itself. But it's far enough away that attacking Hollythorn, Goldfinch, or the Maury docks would cause the city to go into lockdown. So why are they here? What do they gain?" Barnell asked. "When we find them, we'll ask," the dark elf said, nodding ahead of them. There was something foul in the air now, carried by the change of the wind. The stench was like death and rot, but there was something else, a powerful, spiteful magic that sent chills up and down Solaris and Vanessa's spines. The deeper they went into the woods, the stronger the stench became, until it was strong enough Barnell struggled to remain focused, his stomach refusing to settle from the nausea he felt. Vanessa searched her pockets for something, but stopped when Eve knelt by a tree and dug with her hands until she found the untainted soil. She reached under her armor and ripped some cloth from it, soaking the fabric in the water from her water pouch, then smeared the wet cloth into a fine layer of the good soil, wringing the excess out before placing the fabric over Barnell's nose. "How'd you know that would work?" the Dragonborn asked, grateful that the stench was lessened by her efforts. "Had a Dragonborn for a teammate once upon a moon, good at keeping the peace with others and fighting when needed, but he had a sensitive nose. He taught me how to make masks that could help him breathe after we got caught short during a job. Soil masks the rotting and corrupted scent magic gives off. Watering them down means you can still smell other things without worrying about losing your stomach. I owe you one. Take it off the bill for me staying in your house and eating your food while I'm here," Eve said with a smile as they moved on. They came to a stop at the edge of a clearing that had only recently been made. Trees had been uprooted and tossed onto a fire. The soil was cracked and ruined, as if it had suffered a drought, and upon the still burning fire were corpses and misshapen bodies of undead. Before the fire, a single man knelt, his back to them, covered in a cloak that bore the mark of the blessed. What is he doing? Eve shook her head at the question from Barnell, having no clue herself as to what they were witnessing. It may be a cleansing, Solaris said. Necromancers burn the bodies of their long-term puppets to completely erase any past memories that might cling to the bones. But I've never seen or heard of a mass cleansing. He stopped when the man stood suddenly and opened his arms wide as if to embrace the fire that raged before him. "Oh no," Vanessa breathed in realization. "What?" Eve asked in concern, only to cover her mouth to stop from gasping as the fire surged to life, the corpses of the undead becoming nothing but ash amongst the embers as the flames reared to the top of the trees, then charged downwards at the man, seeming to engulf him, and then vanish into the soil, leaving only a blackened stain where it had once been. "Why are you both shaking?" Barnell asked, and Eve looked to Vanessa and Solaris, shocked to see that both elves were shaking. "That was—" Vanessa began, then looked at Solaris. "It's him, isn't it?" "It can be no one else," Solaris nodded. "We have to warn the city." "What's going on?" Eve asked. "We'll explain later. Right now we have to move," Solaris insisted, already heading back the way they'd come. "We must evacuate all the towns around the City of Birds. Everyone has to be moved to the shelters," he added, though it was clear he was listing tasks that needed to be done as a distraction from talking about the matter right away. Eve looked to Barnell, who shook his head. Whatever it was about the man that had the two elves so scared, it was not something they had shared with the bronze dragonborn. When they'd reached the ruins of Hollythorn, Vanessa had created a flare of magic in her hands and sent it into the sky without a word. Vanessa then allowed Solaris to use her steed to ride ahead of them while she rode back with Eve. The road back to the Goldfinch was eerily silent, the air chilled with an unease that made Eve shudder. They'd passed through Goldfinch without stopping. It was abandoned by all but Officer Venn, who fell into line behind Iris. The town had been surrounded with mounted barricades. Buildings were boarded up and sealed with powerful magic and runes in an attempt to keep intruders out. Cassian had clearly been busy while they were away, but now it seemed whatever had Solaris and Vanessa spooked had caused an immediate change in plan. They reached the City of Birds just as the sky began to darken. Guards stood at every post, every gate and every opening. Houses were decorated with shining runes as clerics and monks of the city did all they could to protect their homes, while archers took up every available post. Young guards rushed back and forth with weapons and armor. Families were being ushered to the safety of the inner city. Eve caught sight of elves, dragonborn, human, and even some Aasimar amongst those preparing to defend their home. Whatever was coming, the city of birds would be ready for it. "You want to fill us in on the missing details, Cassian?" Barnell asked as Cassian met them at the door of a huge building, catching Vanessa as she slid off Iris's back, still clearly shaken by whatever it was they had seen in the woods. "That man you saw in the woods is an old foe," the green dragonborn sighed heavily. "He's the one that killed Hope." Barnell seemed to finally understand the matter and shook his head. "Hope?" Eve asked. "My older sister and Solaris's wife," Vanessa explained, trying to compose herself enough to stop the shaking in her hands. "We need to go inside." "Am I allowed to go in?" Eve questioned. "I'm not part of your city or your team," she reminded. "You're the only one who knows information about the Blessed and their goals. That gives you the right to be in there. And if anyone speaks out, I'll remind them that I'm paying you for your help," Barnell said firmly. Cassian nodded. "You been here this long? Can't run you off now," he added. Eve looked to Vanessa for her affirmation, and the high elf nodded. The first attack came just after the moon left the treetops. Swarms of undead beasts and husks charging from a sudden surge of bluish-green fire that tore across the roads leading into the city, their pained death cries continuing to ring loud until fire lashed from the city walls and seared away the foulness of the attack. The ashes of the beasts and husks carried away on an unnaturally strong wind that began to swirl about the city. Magic suddenly sprang to life from the blessed fires, and a new wave of attackers charged forwards. Magic users who spat their words with venom and force towards the city walls and those within. Vanessa and Solaris were amongst the countering wave that blocked the force magic, cutting against it with a natural flow that shattered the force spells before they reached the intended targets. An explosion shattered the gates to the south of the city, but the Blessed did not have time to enter. A bellowing roar was enough to assure Eve of that. Lightning, fire, and acid slammed into the attacking forces alongside axes, clubs, great swords, and fists. Barnell's thunderous roar and Cassian's echoing hiss were a comfort to hear, an assurance that they would not allow the attack to reach those they considered their friends. A third wave of Blessed arrived, armed with weapons and heavily armed, only to be met weapon to weapon with the city's finest. A direwolf making short work of armored limbs, while a tiefling's knife cut through the thin gaps and chinks in armored plates. War cries from the Blessed became mad rants as their forces fell like untrained children to the city's forces, refusing to run or halt their attack. As they refused to surrender, they were given no mercy. Crazed as they were, there was no saving them or reverting whatever sickness had stricken them. Raging fire erupted from the northern road, the flames tainted with bluish-green hues, before the flames lashed towards the city walls, meeting a unified shielding spell that would not fall. Eve saw the flames coming at her and smiled, catching the fire with her short sword and sent it skyward. Fire against a tiefling? Try again, fucker. It was a means to catch your attention, nothing more, a man stated, as the flames tried to surround them, only to be blocked as a second shield formed around Eve. You seem to have become dear to Vanessa and Solaris. Tch! Eve spat. Do not try and make yourself out to be a fool. You know tieflings don't have friends in elves. Then why are you here, fighting for them? The man asked. Coin is coin, Eve shrugged. Plus, I have no love for the blessed and their mad crusade, so killing them is a bonus. You have issue with my company, just as I have issue with yours, he concluded, then stepped into view. He was a tall male, dressed in an ebony suit of royal elven armor, decorated with silver chains and a deep maroon cloak in place of the traditional gold, white gold, and silver cloak. Perhaps we can reason this out as civilized adults, he offered. Civilized adults, Eve repeated, and jerked her head towards the city. You call attacking a peaceful city in the night with a legion of crazed undead beasts, husks, magic thieves, and poorly trained madmen civilized? My disdain towards the city of birds and those within it is not your concern. I have no such disdain for a stranger to this battle, he offered in an even tone, slowly bringing his left hand up to his right shoulder, and gave a shallow bow. I see no reason why we cannot speak as civil people. You stand with the blessed. That is reason enough for me to see you as a fool with nothing but madness in your brain, Eve reiterated, making sure to keep distance between them as the battle died down around them. The city's people returned to the city to reform their lines, ready for whatever else might come. I might not be of this city, or friends with the ones inside it, but I am not heartless, nor do I agree with the madness of the Black Hood's plans, and how he disrespects the dead and resting to gain something so foolish as power. On that we shall agree to disagree, he stated. I offer you a simple deal, Tiefling. Sheath your weapons and leave this place now. I will not attack you, nor will I permit the blessed with me to do so, and you will never hear or see me amongst the blessed again. Let me think on that just a moment, Eve said. I leave a city that has thus far been very kind to me, given me food, shelter, and also has a very nice little shop that sells the most divine cakes and muffins, and let it be destroyed by you, who have some unknown grudge to the people of the city. Or stay here, fight you and the blessed, and burn off some of that pent-up anger at the fact that this is the third time I've faced the blessed, and I'm tired of fucking dealing with their shit. Let me think. You would be wise to consider my offer carefully, Tiefling. I am not often so generous as to offer mercy, he stated, and drew a pair of curved swords from beneath his cloak, flipping them to a forehand stance. I am unlikely to spare you should you continue to act so foolishly. Eve smiled and flipped her knife and short sword into their sheaths, then drew 2 new blades from the single sheath along her back with ease. Foolish is just a snob's word for thrill-seeker. Solaris watched from the wall of the city as Eve and the newcomer lunged at one another, blades snapping and locking for seconds, sparks dancing between the two as they held ground, pushing and forcing one another back and forth with a graceful flair only dual-wielding fighters seemed to have. He wasn't worried that Eve couldn't handle the sword fight on her own. She'd survived this long, so she clearly had some skill. No, his worry lay in what the stranger would do if Eve proved to be the better combatant. He'd witnessed this elf strike low, using tricks and deceptive ploys to win when he was losing. Vanessa was atop Iris's back, ready to join the fight if he gave the signal. Barnell and Cassian maintaining a defensive line between the damaged gate and the outside. You're skilled, he said as they locked blades. Flattery gets you nowhere, she assured, twisting the right blade sharply downwards while bringing the left up, the movement blocked when he crossed all their blades for a moment at their hilts. An observation. Nothing more," he assured, staggering back as she kicked him away, slashing his thighs with her tail as she spun, flipping one sword to a back hand, and drove the other forwards, intent on running him through. He managed to knock the blade off course from his chest, but not fast enough to avoid the blow entirely, as the blade punctured his right shoulder armor and lodged in his flesh. Eve tore the sword free from his shoulder with a backflip as he tried to take her head off with a sweep of the sword in his left hand. She twisted at the hips and went down to one knee as she landed, catching both his blades between her own, and locked them in place as she stood again, forcing him to slide back. "Why do you stand in my way? You have no friends here." "Maybe not. But I do love cakes and muffins," Eve said. "Evelyn!" The stranger and Tiefling broke apart at the warning cry from Vanessa. Something large and fast chased Eve, backing off only when a fireball slammed into the beast. A great hooded snake with luminous blue scales on a pure black body. The snake gave a low hiss, its focus now upon Vanessa as the High Elf joined Eve, Iris growling and snarling at the giant serpent. "Hello, Vanessa." "Leave here, Quinn," the High Elf commanded. "You have nothing to gain in attacking the city." "I may not have anything to gain from taking this city, outside of the satisfaction of taking something else dear to Solaris's heart. But the Black Hood wants this city for something, and that means everyone in the city needs to die," the male elf stated with a mocking smile. "You're a fool," Eve spat at him. "There is more to this than you simple fools will ever understand." "But soon you will," Quinn assured, as the snake coiled around him, and the two departed in a column of fire. Well, today's been fun. Gods above and below us, where do I begin? I've learned so much today that it's almost overwhelming. I have to write it down or I won't sleep. Eve sighed as she tapped the tip of her needlepoint against the top corner of her page, taking a moment to focus her thoughts before she put them down. Quinn. That's the name of the guy who's out to kill everyone in the City of Birds so he can hand the city over to the Blessed and hurt Solaris. Whatever their disagreement is, it's got something to do with a late sister of Vanessa, a woman named Hope who married Solaris. According to what Cassian told me and Barnell after we'd finished cleaning up the mess the attack had made of the city walls and gate, Vanessa and Hope were both born here in the City of Birds, and both served in the war between this land and its neighboring continent. At the end of the war, they were approached by the local nobility and the Dark Elf community with the offer of marriage. Vanessa declined as she wanted to travel the land more and experience life outside of the city. When she returned with Cassian, Hope was happily married to Solaris, and their union had brought about stable trade lines between the City of Birds and the City of Bats, where Solaris was born and raised. That's not all. Correspondence came in from other cities, even Hell's Gate and the Empire of Eden. And it turns out the Black Hood and his Blessed aren't just out for power and to reclaim the lost city of Runation. They're planning to take down the three guardians who protect the entire continent and claim it as the new Runation Empire. It's madness! Utter madness! They are convinced they will win, even though there is no evidence or even proof that they will have the power to find, much less harm, a creature so powerful as the Guardians. It would be laughable, if not for the evidence that the Blessed had managed to take over the cities of Lunglong and Shangxi, and had made two failed attempts to claim North Polaris. They're holding out for now, but they're in need of aid. I hope Ashkin, Lucifer, and Pa are all right in Hell's Gate. I've sent a letter to them all, but I have no idea if it will reach them. She sighed again, shaking her head to stop herself going down that line of thought. It would only make her worry more. I remember when I first encountered the blessed. Two men accused of robbing graves in the dead of night in the land of Galita. The accused were hanged for their crimes, and that same night 60 undead rose from their graves. If I hadn't turned in early that night, I'd have been in trouble for sure. Then they showed up in Ishtar. Of all places to be hated, they couldn't have picked a better place than Ishtar, home of the largest population of orcs, driders, kobold, and goblins. They attacked the fortress of Bone Crown, and when their forces met resistance, they had no way to retreat. I remember the list of jobs only because it was rather amusing to watch the blessed necromancers try to rise the long dead from bone piles, only for the risen to be little more than a skull on one leg. I must write to Marcus soon and see if they are even still trying to claim the Ishtar lands for their own, and see if he can send me the recipe for dried silk again. Speaking of Marcus, he'd have likely loved to see the training level beneath this city. I thought for a minute I'd walked back into Ishtar. I'll be going down there tomorrow to brush up on my skills and see about practicing with Iris more. This fight isn't going to be over with just one clash of blades, and I know better than to just forego the chance to stay prepared. I just have to make sure I eat before I go down there. Eve? Vanessa asked as she knocked at the door. Come in, Eve permitted, setting her needlepoint down. Something happening I need to know about? No, Vanessa assured, stepping into the room and trying to seem calm. I'm just trying to distract myself from the situation, she said. Sit down before you fall down. You're shaking like a rattler's tail, Eve said, leaning against the back of her chair again with a small smile. I'd offer you a drink from my bag of tricks, but I'm trying to cut down myself, and I don't think tempting you would really help with what you're going through. Vanessa sighed, but nodded in understanding. I've managed to cope this long because I've had Cassian and distance from it all. Now it's all happening so fast and so suddenly, I just haven't had the time or chance to really let it all sink in, she said. If I asked you what your thoughts were on this matter, what would you answer? You mean besides the glaringly obvious madness of it all? Eve offered, then shook her head, taking the distraction for what it was, and not pressing for the real reason Vanessa had sought her out just yet. It's complex, and clearly the blessed are not just a disjointed gaggle of fools I thought they were, based on my past encounters with them. If the plan they have is truly their end goal, I'm worried what lengths they'd go to. Do you think they could accomplish what they plan? Vanessa asked, even if it seems madness? Ma used to say madness and greatness can share the same face, Eve remarked. Maybe that's what this is for the Black Hood and his blessed. A way to become great through mad methods. But why? Why try to bring about the new Ruination Empire at all? What do they gain in doing this that makes the risks they take so worth the efforts? The Tiefling shrugged. I'm just as lost on the reasons as you are, Vanessa. But I do know that my gut is telling me there is something more to this, something we're not yet seeing. Until we know more, understand more about what the Blessed and the Black Hood intend to do, we're playing with half a deck on an unknown field. Vanessa could only nod in agreement, then took a deep breath to still herself. I came to ask if you would be willing to help me with something. Eve looked at her for a moment. Why me and not someone you've known longer? Because Solaris will not agree to it. Barnell is not versed in it, and Cassian will not truly push me, Vanessa said. The others here would either brush me off or refuse outright. But if I don't do this, I fear I may fall into the same fate as my sister." The Tiefling was silent, then nodded. "Whatever it is you have between you isn't my business. So, what do you need my help with?" "Solaris has opened the training ground below the city. I saw you fight Quinn as if you had done it for years, and only a few of us in the city can fight with dual weapons. I want to learn how to defend against that style of fighting," Vanessa explained. "Solaris refuses to come at me with weapons drawn because of our history. He refuses to do harm on me because he feels it will be disrespectful to Hope. Cassian will face me, but he won't push me the way I need to be pushed to learn, and Barnell is not versed in dual wielding." Eve smiled. "So you're asking me to help you, knowing I'll push you and make sure you learn the harsh way? You're not shy that you enjoy fighting, and you enjoyed what happened today. Even with how much we've learned about the Black Hood and the Blessed, you loved fighting them," Vanessa said. I I enjoyed that little spat. But I'm not stupid, Vanessa. That fight was nothing but a test to see if we were ready. And even though it seemed to go our way, Quinn didn't leave just because you showed up. That snake collected him, and that means another attack is coming." Eve began with a chuckle. "I'll train you as you were asking me to. It will be the training I received. Harsh, painful, and if you're not a fast learner, you will find it repetitive. Can you handle that?" Vanessa nodded. "I can." "Then I suggest you rest up well tonight. I'll meet you in the breakfast hall tomorrow, and after a bite to eat, we'll get started," Eve assured. "Thank you, Eve." Vanessa smiled in relief, and after lightly patting Iris's head as she passed, the high elf left the room. Eve turned back to her journal, tapping her needlepoint into the ink again. "Looks like I have a sparring partner to help me out tomorrow. Vanessa's looking to learn how to fight against dual wielders, and no one else is willing to give her the real lesson. Can't say I've ever had the skill to teach someone much more than the basics, but if it helps her out with whatever she's going through, I'll do it. I'll leave it at this for now, if only because if I don't sleep soon I will be tired and sloppy against Vanessa, and I don't want to show myself to be a poor teacher. I'll write down everything else tomorrow in better detail." Putting her needlepoint down again, Eve moved to the bed and dropped onto the soft blanket and pillow, smiling as Iris climbed onto the bed beside her, and together they slipped into slumber.